At what monthly spend level should an organization plan for reserved instance or savings plan commitments? Can a company with monthly spend of ten to $15,000 per month plan to purchase commitment-based discount opportunities? And that's a good question. I think a lot of people assume that you have to be spending a lot of money in AWS before, like a lot of money in AWS before you start resource pre-purchasing. But really, it kind of comes down to two things. It comes down to commitment and consistency. How much are you
Yeah,
willing to commit, and how consistently are you talking about using a given technology?
yeah. It's really an interesting question because it frames it as if like, am I spending enough? And the question
Right,
is, if you are spending any, you are spending enough.
right.
If you only got $10,000 to $15,000, but that's all in on-demand EC2 spend, you could turn that 15 to $10,000 to $15,000 into $5,000 to $7,000, right?
Yeah.
Um, just by committing to using it, right?
Yep.
Now, there's a couple of different strategies you want to look at, right? You want to look at what service you're using or what service is driving your cost, whether that service has reservations. And then if so, what style of reservation do you want? Obviously, as we said before, the longer you commit and the more you prepay, the more you're going to save.
Hmm.
But if you're spreading that cost across a few services, that's going to change your strategy a little bit. It's, do you get reserved instances or do you get a savings plan? If you're using EC2 compute, it's going to depend on where it is. If you don't want to commit to using a specific instance type for a certain amount of time, maybe you want to look at a compute savings plan, right? But if you are using, I know we're going to be using, M5s for in this region for the next 2 to 3 years, then you can save a lot of money by committing to using that, prepaying or just making the commitment and paying monthly.
For sure. I mean, and this kind of comes back to AWS's strategy here, right? One of the biggest benefits of pay for what you use from our point of view is that you're only paying for what you use. But from AWS's point of view, if you suddenly stop, then that revenue isn't coming in for them anymore. So they're incentivized to keep you on some degree of commitment of stability in exchange for a fairly deep discount because their margins are colossal anyway.